Welcome, everyone. Appreciate your patience this morning. One of these last-minute technical glitches that got us off to a slow start, but we're very pleased to be addressing this topic and very thankful for our panelists who are joining. I just want to remind everyone, this is a sort of an open call, so we ask your cooperation in muting your microphones, and then at any point during the conversation, feel free to use the chat mode to type in any questions that you will have for our panelists. We have a series of preset questions that Alejandro will be sharing with the panelists and they'll be responding to, but then we have some time dedicated in the second half of the hour to address your questions. So again, this is a very interesting topic for us. I myself, years ago, worked quite a bit on the Pascua Lama project and became quite aware of the issues on both sides of the border, which are quite unique one from the other. And really that project has, more than any project, I think, in either country, gone on to define both the mining opposition movements in both countries, as well as help define and prioritize some of the government policies issues that impact mining. I think before Pascua Lama, neither Chile nor Argentina had really created very clear regulations around mining in glaciers. And because in the case of Chile, of course, most mining up until then had taken place in the northern part of the country. And in Argentina, a much less mature mining jurisdiction, although it had other projects in glaciers, had not really fully defined that. And of course, glacier regulations and legislation in Argentina today is perhaps the most important mining issue that we've covered in the past as well. But I don't want to steal the lead and take away from the insights and time of our panelists. Let me just very quickly share with you that those of us who know us, this will be a bit repetitive, but we are, apart from doing mining coffee chats, we are a consulting firm that really supports miners at two stages and mining investors. One is pre-investment, helping companies to assess the risk in a given country, but much more importantly, I think, in the local environment where the mine is to be built or where the mine is being purchased. And to support that, we have recently published a mining risk index report that covers 16 countries. We've printed a number of these, and we're going to be handing them out at PDAC next week, where Alejandro and I will be attending, and hopefully some of you will be there. And for those of you who won't, we will be distributing it digitally in about 2 weeks' time. So we look forward to your feedback on that front. We also help miners once they're up and going, and they have, particularly at critical times, when they're quite vulnerable to risks, whether it's the pre-licensing stage or they've sunk the cost into the mine and they haven't yet started. These are critical junctures when project risk is often at its most acute, and we will help companies be their eyes and ears on the ground, including local intelligence gathering, to help them understand all of the complexities of the different players at stake that may be opposing a mine, as well as those that could be good allies to a project. So really, it's for those of you who are veterans in this industry in Latin America, you know how complex that local environment can get, and we're there to help you understand that. Let's move forward. I've already mentioned that we have our mining risk index report, which will soon be released. We also have a mining risk white paper that is sort of an antecedent to that report, where we originally defined 7 areas of risk as we saw it in the mining sphere. And those 7 areas of risk are in fact the same 7 areas that we now quantify in the mining risk index. We do these regular coffee chats, we do webinars a couple times a year, and we publish regular reports. We now have a newsletter that goes out every couple months around our insights on mining. And if you are not part of receiving those, please do go to our site, and you'll see there where you can sign up to receive any of this information. It's all for free, and we're happy to share it with you. Okay. I've already alluded to this, but I want to just remind us all that in spite of all of the headlines that we hear, and certainly there are being a lot of headline newsworthy items in Chile and Peru in particular around mining, and how the new governments in those countries are looking at mining with a different set of eyes, not to mention, of course, the constitutional reforms underway in Chile, that several clauses of which are going to impact mining. And those are all important, and they deserve our attention. But at the end of the day, when you assess project risk, when you price a project, when you try to discount its future revenue flows over time, it is local issues that are going to fundamentally impact that project's viability. And as much as there is a fair bit of press coverage of those national level political issues, regulatory issues, and legal issues, it is a lot harder to get good intelligence around a particular project, around a particular community, regional power brokers, and all of the stakeholders that impact a mine. And that's where we come in, as do other consulting firms, but that's really where we add value to mining companies and investors. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Alejandro, to introduce our panel.
Thank you, John. And I would like to extend a warm welcome and our sincerest thanks to our three panelists today. We are joined by a very distinguished team of experts in mining in both Chile and Argentina, which are the two jurisdictions that we're going to be discussing today. First is Daniela Rojas. Daniela is a lawyer based in Chile. She has been working in corporate consulting for the mining sector for a number of years, and she has worked with very important mining corporations such as Barrick and the Servicio Nacional de Capacitación y Empleo de Chile, which, in spite of not being directly linked to mining, is one of the most important players in training the workforce in this jurisdiction. And we're very happy to have you, Daniela. Thank you for joining. We also have Christopher Becks. Chris is based in Chile and has over 45 years of experience in mining, environmental, and civil engineering. He has worked in project research, exploration, mine development, and has experience in jurisdictions spanning all of Latin America, especially Chile, Peru, Bolivia, and Ecuador, as well as some jurisdictions abroad, such as Australia, the UK, and in a couple Southeast Asian countries. So thank you, Chris, for joining. We're very happy to have you. And finally, we are joined by Ricardo Martinez. Ricardo is a native from Argentina. He's a geologist who has worked in a number of mining projects in Argentina, including a couple that are very relevant to today's presentation, such as Jose Maria Vicuña and Los Helados. And he has substantial experience on both the operational and reputational analysis of the mining industry on the Argentinian side of the border. So to you, Ricardo, thank you for joining us. And with that, I will start with a brief overview for what we are going to be touching on today before turning it over to the panelists. In 1997, there was a binational treaty signed between Chile and Argentina with the goal of promoting mining in both jurisdictions, and especially in the border between the two countries. These two countries share a very large land border, which includes the Acatama Desert, that is now known to have some of the largest mineral reserves in the world, especially for copper, lithium, gold, and a couple other very important minerals. The treaty was ratified by both countries on the early 2000s, and with the hype around this treaty came a couple projects that were at the time considered to be some of the largest in the continent. The most notable of them, as John mentioned earlier, was Pascua Lama, but it was not the only one. And in the screen, you see 4 or 5 other examples of projects that were going to be substantial investments of both capital and human resources, and that were promoted in light of this treaty. A couple decades later, none of these projects have yet come into operation, and most of them are far from becoming a reality. Pascua Lama in particular is still stuck in environmental and social licensing in both jurisdictions, and it's unclear if it will ever be developed, and if so, which shape it will take compared to the original design that was proposed back in the early 2000s. We have the example of El Pachón, which was a project originally promoted in light of this treaty. El Pachón was eventually developed, but it operates in Argentina only, meaning that it did not make use of the benefits provided by the treaty, and it let go of the Chilean side of the exploration. There is another project operated by NGEX Minerals that is focused on the Argentinian side of what is called the Maricunga Gold Belt, which is a substantial gold formation that is mostly located in Chile, but nonetheless, this company decided to pursue exploration and development only in the Argentinian side, and again, did not make use of the benefits provided by the treaty. And currently, there are no mines operating simultaneously in both sides of the border. We have one example, which is search explorations in Kawasi lithium salar, which has been in development since 2018 and is expected to become operational in 2024. This salar is effectively located between the two jurisdictions, but it is still at a stage in its development where it is unclear if and how it will make use of the benefits of this bilateral treaty and the effective exploration in the two countries. So due to all of these issues pertaining to development of mining in Chile and Argentina, the mining community was understandably interested when earlier this year, Lundin and BHP partnered to develop the Filo del Sol project, which is a mine that has substantial resources in copper, gold, and silver, and would require a capital outlay of between $4 and $5 billion. And most importantly, it would be located exactly in the border between Argentina and Chile, and would probably make use of all the benefits from the treaty signed over 2 decades ago, in addition to perhaps kickstarting once again the interest by the international community in developing these kinds of binational projects. And it is with this mine, the Filo del Sol project, that we are today interested in analyzing what we may perhaps be able to label as a resurgence of binational projects between Chile and Argentina. So with that said, I would like to start with the discussion with our panelists, and first of all begin with Daniela, to whom I would like to ask about the treaty and the legal aspects of it. So, and this treaty was called the Mining Integration and Complementation Treaty, and it was signed by the presidents of Chile and Argentina in 1997, and it was later ratified by each country's legislature in the year 2000. And it permits investors to explore and exploit mineral deposits that straddle the border between the two countries. The tax disputes between the governments of Chile and Argentina have been at the core of the issues that have hindered development of mines in the border. And notably, in the case of Pascua Lama, the Chilean government argued at one point in the past 2 decades that most of the taxes from the mine's output should be paid in Chile, since 90% of the minerals were concentrated on the Chilean side of the mountain range. But Argentine authorities, on the other hand, proposed a 50-50 split, citing the fact that most of the construction work was to be done on the Argentinian side of the mountains. So, Daniela, based on these discussions and the overall spirit of the treaty, what can investors expect from the current tax regime applicable to cross-border projects between Argentina and Chile? How can they leverage this existing legal wireframe to grow these types of projects like the Filo del Sol and others that may be under consideration?
Well, I think that to talk about the binational projects, we will take a couple of days or maybe months, because it's a lot of story about it. But it's not a mystery that currently in a globalized world, the binational initiatives are a natural development opportunity for the investor, and this was because this starts. How the states take charge of resolving the political, sovereign, tax, and economic challenges, it's still an unresolved unknown for the investors. This is the reality right now. And when Argentina and Chile, as you said before, consolidated mining integrational treaty in 1997, they did it in a climate of political cooperation, economic deregulation, and border facilitation. That was the spirit. And followed by a negotiation and signing of different complementary protocols in which both the states delegate the sovereignty to a supranational sphere, that it's not something easy for the states. And this involves different matters, including the everyday use of the Andes natural resources, that reciprocal protection of the investment, and a series of specific regulatory protocols of the mining activities projects, such as you said before, Pascua Lama, Vicuña, Las Flechas, and El Pachón. The treaty has a political significance, of course, becoming a decision to open the border to investors and the commitment to joint and coordinated work to promote and defend the mining activity. This was the idea, the political idea. On the other hand, it has an economic meaning, of course. One of these objectives being to make a mining business attractive for the investment, the realization of which will be challenging to the limitation that have the border issues that involve different laws, and also considering one of the objectives of the treaty to provide greater securities and reciprocity in the treatment of investors operating in the area, and of course making it more attractive, has attractive place for development, the projects, and in the same time achieving this was the soul of the treaty, achieving an everyday use of geological resources rationally for one side, and using the most advanced engineering, and also achieving logistical advantages, has, for example, in the case of Argentina's, access to Chilean ports. One of the most complex issues to resolve is the tax issue, of course. And following the treaty, one of the principal rules is the respect. And this means that for respect for the current tax legislation regarding the activities carried out entirely in the territory of one of the countries under the concept of stable establishment or permanent. And this could be nearly clear for the investment. But this situation is utterly different from other kind of service it's called invisible cross-border services, which are those that for technical or economic reasons are carried out on both sides of the border in a single way and in a single provider, and that is directly linked to the project. So it's really important because it has such as a mining activity, operation, maintenance of tunnel and conveyor belts, maintenance of trucks, water management system, meteorology, environmental management, closure of work sites, and among all other related to extractive activities and industrial safety. The issue is of particular relevance if we see the story of Pascua Lama. As you said before, if we consider that in the case of Pascua Lama project, the mineral extracted in Chile will be processed in Argentina, which generally, from a normal tax perspective, will be considered a new product originating in Argentina. In the normal tax perspective, it's something that it was originated in Argentina if you a new one processed there. And then if you think about that, tax in Argentina both for the mineral extracted from its territory, that of course was a little percent, but for the processing of the mineral too. And this mineral whose extraction it's carried out in the Chilean territory. For this reason, it's that the Mining Integration Treaty and its specific additional protocol expressly contemplate this situation, stating that the origin of the mineral and its products will be given by the place of extraction, regardless of the place of processing. So, however, even the problem of invisible cross-border services and the definitive tax regime has not been able to find a solution within the administrative commission of the treaty. In the practice, there are still not projects in operating. There are still not projects in operation. And this has not forced the government to resolve these matters definitively, and still maintaining a series of questions related not only about the taxes issues, but also about another important issues as, for example, the environmental legislation. So it's something that it is still not clear, and it's something that it is still not closed for the investors.
Thank you, Daniela. Those are very interesting insights, and especially regarding the operational side of the business, you touched on some very relevant aspects that I would like to ask our other two panelists about, starting with Ricardo, but I would first like to make a caveat, which is that at AMI, we are not, technical mining consultants in the sense that we don't advise on the geological and operational aspects of mining. However, there are at least two key operational issues that are related to the greater macroeconomic environment of a country that are key to mining operations and that AMI likes to have a clear understanding about. And those are energy and electricity supply and transportation needs and how they are met in each jurisdiction. So having said that, I would like to pass the word to you, Ricardo, because binational mining projects between Argentina and Chile are likely to be located in areas where water is scarce. The limited water resources feed rural communities where agricultural activities are the way of life, and this underpins social unrest towards binational projects, especially in the cases of large projects that consume significant amounts of water resources. So based on your experience, how can miners manage water in the Argentina-Chile border to prevent depleting communities from this resource? If you could provide a very quick overview of what are some of the initiatives that miners are undertaking to better manage this risk.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation to participate. I am grateful of the panel today. Answering your question, geology doesn't stop in boundary limits, political or any sort of limits. Also, you are on the headwaters of both sides of the Andes, in particular, for example, for Pascua Lama or Las Flechas Vicuña, or even the Valle Ancho area, northern part of Catamarca. But in these areas, the only contribution, and we'll start from there, the only contribution to the analysis of the aquifers or the superficial possibilities of extracting water are basically under the study of what is called the environmental analysis, or the environmental from the prospecting stage reports that the mining companies have to achieve. This is always supervised by the water authorities in either countries, but certainly the only cooperation, or the main cooperation, initially starts from the mining projects, establishing the actual knowledge. So that knowledge is, as long as it goes down, obviously, to each of the countries, gives the alerts to the other community members that are using that water, and that obviously trust that the past is the best condition they always enjoyed. So with no mining projects, they had no knowledge, but they had no fears. In this case, essentially, and going back to what John Price said earlier in this meeting, the actual regional and local knowledge is a key element of that understanding, because understanding the aquifers, understanding the water availability, the role that the glaciers and the snowfall plays on these recharge models is the key element to prove whatever water will be available finally for either projects on both sides. That's very well understood by the mining community working in these areas. And when you start exploring, and I will cite, for example, the case of Pascua Lama initially, but also the actual cases, or the more current cases of Filo del Sol, Jose Maria, which are under initial developments. There's a lot of studies and a lot of supervision by the environmental authorities in Argentina, especially in San Juan, because we are in the middle of a drought. So the actual condition that you have to envision and practice is to be cooperative with all the authorities and give all the information and play the environmental role of being in the headwaters and potentially affecting the downstream of all those currents. So there is a clear understanding, there is an environmental way of legally accessing all this data, and that's being done, at least in the Argentina side. I am very aware. Also, I am aware of the conditions of the CONAMA and the other authorities on the Chilean side. They are pretty much into it from the very early start of the projects. So that obviously doesn't secure that there will be no conflicts, but at least gives the best understanding that is potentially possible for these large projects and these large water users. I hope it's clear.
Yes, Ricardo, thank you. And you touched on an interesting issue, which is the environmental impact assessments. And Daniela, I would like to get back to you and follow up with the question about those, because social and environmental impact assessments are another very important area of risk for miners, as each country, Chile and Argentina, has its own set of guidelines to conduct these assessments. In your view, Daniela, to what extent, if at all, can miners build synergies in developing their impact assessments between countries? Are they completely different between one jurisdiction and the other, or is there some way that a miner looking to develop a binational mine can leverage each regulation to develop the project? You are on mute, Daniela. Sorry.
Okay, now.
Thank you.
It's precisely another big question in this matter. Considering that, as Ricardo said before, that environmental laws of both countries have particularities and make it joint work a little bit difficult. For example, unlike Argentina, Chile does not yet have a glacier law. This is a big example because in Argentina, the glacier law, it's a really important legislation and a great regulation for the mining project. In my practice, from my experience in Pascua Lama, the companies work with distant teams on both sides of the border. So the impacts and risk assessment of the project, which should be a coordinated effort, in practice is not carried out. Advancing each part, of course, according to its regulatory requirements, and to put in some way, neglecting these synergies that could be obtained from an adequate joint evaluation of social, environmental impacts of the project to strengthen the social license and thereby minimizing the risk associated with it. And I believe that it's absolutely possible, and it's also very important considering the logic of binational projects. Coordinated work on both sides of the border, not only in a risk and assessment impacts or risk and impacts assessment, it's also in another points has environmental investment strategy, governance, and in general, in all the issues that may impact your LTO, your license to operate. So it's really, really a big matter, and it's really important, these synergies in both sides of the border.
Thank you, Daniela. And to everyone attending our chat today, if you have any questions that you would like to ask our panelists, please type them on the chat box so that we can discuss them in the final portion of the conversation. I would like to move now to Chris Beggs to discuss another key operational risk, which is transportation. So Chris, Argentina and Chile share key railways that facilitate the transport of people and goods between the countries. Perhaps the most notable examples or the most notable railways are the Transandine Railway and the Salta Antofagasta Railway. And there are plans to build another line connecting Bahía Blanca in southern Argentina with the northern Patagonian port city of Talcahuano in Chile to create this Pacific Atlantic link that would greatly improve trade between the two countries. In your opinion, Chris, based in your experience working in mining projects over a number of years, what is your opinion on the availability of transportation infrastructure for mining in the Argentina-Chile border?
Good day to you all, and thank you for asking me to join you. I've been a little bit surprised looking at what you have sent us and also the conversation this morning, because I personally worked on the Pascua Lama project about 5 or 6 years ago. And my comment on that, I only worked on the Lama side in Argentina. And the indications, the geological and mineralogical investigations in Lama were fairly positive. But there was the investigations in the Pascua, so on the Chile side, in the Pascua, in the valley, were geologically not at all interesting, and there was very little to mine on the Chilean side, as far as could be made out, and also there was quite a lot of social resistance to the project, and of course, to my mind, the project just doesn't exist. It would be possible to continue with some mining in fact, I'm not sure, maybe it does exist, some mining on the Argentinian side, but with processing of the ore and the mineral and the production of maybe copper in Argentina. The other projects that you were showing on the map, I must admit I've not heard of before, and as far as I know, they don't exist, and I have not heard of any plans for them to exist. And I would add that the transport links between Chile and Argentina are pretty much strictly, there are very few of them, and they are highways, roads. I don't believe there are any operating railways between Chile and Argentina. Obviously, Chile plays an important role if there was development of these mines, in that the Chilean ports are very much for export of the minerals, the metals. The Chilean ports are very much closer to the ocean than or at least to the mines. The ocean is very much closer on the Chilean side than it is on the Argentinian side. So I would see the opportunity there would be just for transport, and it's basically by road transport to whether it's Valparaiso or somewhere in Antofagasta or somewhere in the north. There are various ports that Chile uses at the moment for exports of metals, and they could be used. But as I say, there are, to my mind, as far as I can see, looking at maps, there are only 3 or 4 road contacts across the border. So quite honestly, I don't see a great deal of future, as I say, apart from the mines operating in Argentina, if they can, and with the metal processing in Argentina and the export through Chile. Now, from a tax point of view, that is, I think, probably fairly easy to sort out. But that's really just my sort of view. As I say, the only project that really looked like it might happen was the Pascua Lama project, and it just didn't. And I don't think it will. Apart Lama may work in the future. Or in fact, it may be operating now. I don't know. I've been out of contact with it for several years now. Maybe somebody can comment on that. So really, I don't have a great deal of enthusiasm for your idea of cross-border mining between Chile and Argentina.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I mean, it is definitely, binational mining projects are definitely some of the most complex in the mining community. There are not many examples of mining projects developed jointly between 2 countries anywhere in the world. And with the complexities that are present in Latin American politics and societies, it can only be expected that complexity for developing mining projects is going to increase further. We have 2 questions from the audience, and I would like to tackle them. But first of all, very quickly, I would like to turn over to Ricardo. Ricardo, if you could very quickly make a comment on the following. At several sites in the lithium-rich provinces of Salta and Jujuy in Argentina, mining companies are exploring the use of solar panels to generate their own energy, which is a novel approach that perhaps could give companies independence from the national gas infrastructure and electricity grids. Using green hydrogen through electrolysis has also been floated as an environmentally friendly alternative, although as those of you in frequent contact with mining operations will know, This technique requires significant amounts of water, and in the border, this alternative is faced with an inevitable water scarcity. Ricardo, if you could very quickly comment on, in your experience, how are miners currently addressing the need for reliable and competitively priced sources of energy, at least in Argentina, or if you can comment on some examples in Chile, but especially in Argentina, how are miners addressing the need for competitively priced sources of energy?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's a very important issue, obviously, availing enough power and the possibility of having different contributions from renewables in general. I personally think, and this is a matter of continuous efforts and studies, that most of the costs related to the potential alternative for power to any mining project, obviously the farthest are the higher cost usually, is the availability of power lines that will transport that power. So I will say that becoming into this new era of decarbonization and renewable power, most of these mining areas, especially the northern part of the country and the lithium flats or the lithium brine areas, which are the Puna Plateau, high up in the Andes, over 4,000 meters, have very good potential for solar powering. And in some areas, solar-wind power. The other alternative that you are mentioning, hydrogen, is still in diapers, still under initial studies, still, as you said, needs a lot of water and a lot of power, and obviously needs power lines to conduct that electricity into the main area of the users. So I will say, and this has been a good experience in Argentina, through different investing alternatives that most of the mining companies have to go into, which are basically under the figure of provincial trust funds. The power system of Argentina, especially on the west side and the northern part of it, has been improved continuously over the years. For example, the trust fund for Pascua Lama invested over $150 million in the power transportation of high voltage lines in the region of San Juan. And now the Jose Maria project is going to fix that connection to the north into the La Rioja area, which is the next province to the north. So all the power alternatives for renewables, solar in first place, eventually hydropower in some restricted water resources, so wind power, and eventually any other alternative will have the higher cost component of the system, which is the transportation lines in high voltage available and the transfer plants for that. So that's the contribution of mining to the overall network of power for the country. And that's one of the main situations with the social license. And that's one of the things that, again, the local and regional arena brings into the play when you're talking about risks. And when the higher the risk is when the mining companies do not enjoy the best relationship with the local partners and the local stakeholders. And that's essentially our learning curve from the early years when we were all geologists trying to attract capital to be invested in looking for projects and looking for mineral resources. And now we find ourselves with the evolution of this situation, talking too much more to the local communities than to the international investors, because that's our role. That's our participation role in all this scheme of investing and gaining every day, because it's not a snapshot. It's always a moving movie that changes every day, where you have to get the social license in place with all the communities. And that was the main problem, as Christopher said, regarding Pascua Lama. There was a big project, a lot of talent, technical talent, legal talent, tax talent brought into place, but they forgot about talking to the communities in real places and real times. And both sides, most strongly on the Alto Copiapó area of Chile, and that was the main cause of the problematic situation that Pascua Lama had to go through, and that I find very difficult to be solved. To inform the rest of the audience and Chris, Lama is still under study for eventual reserves, mostly silver, not that much gold, and as well as Veladero, which is going into the near 20 years of production, and is trying to extend their mine life a little bit more.
Thank you, Ricardo. And I would like to discuss now one of the questions that we have from the audience. This is from Mario Juarez, who would like to know what are the experiences related to attempts to organize the export of mineral concentrates from Argentina to Chile? And simultaneously, what are the opinions of the panelists regarding importing desalinated seawater from Chile to Argentina? So I think Ricardo and Christopher, you may want to chime in on this, but Daniela also, by all means, if you have any insights, we would be very much interested in hearing them.
Daniela, you first.
I was reading the first question, so just do it.
Okay.
It's a legal matter, so I feel more comfortable.
Okay, I think there's a lot of projects that in their scope studies have thought of and have attempted to complete an alternative to export mineral concentrates and eventually some cathodes from some potential copper producers into Chile through different roads, especially in the central part of Chile. Los Azules is one of the cases. Pachón was another case back in the days when they were owned by Extrata. It hasn't been the case in the last few years when the property has been gone into Glencore, and they're only working on the alternative developed by the Argentina side. I will say that tax issues and eventual logistical issues can all be solved if you have the right approach to the main important and what the learning curve has taught us, that is community relations. If you talk to the stakeholders from the Argentina side into the Chilean ports, I am very positive about the authorities working out a real good tax regime, a real good situation for the logistics and all that. But it has to be understood well by both governments, and it has to be well understood by the authorities, which are always changing in both sides of the countries. So there is an alternation of different governments on both sides of Argentina and Chile that do not match usually to the same interest lines that had the original signers of the binational agreement. So that alternation of alternative behaviors of different governments brings a lot of these different political risks that have to be understood. So given the case, authorities and political risk is one thing, and mostly the initial point, I will say always, is the communities and the commercial factors on both sides to be aligned into the same mining project. And it's part of the final feasibility for anyone. That will solve, or at least is the summary that I can present. And regarding the importation of water from the sea, is obviously an alternative because of the actual conditions of several of the projects which may eventually have no enough water. Obviously, it's higher cost, but it will allow to have those projects developing in the near future, and it always play with the value of the metal. If it's copper and gold, if we get sustaining values or increasing values for those metals, I will say that time will come.
Thank you, Ricardo. Chris, yeah. I don't know if you have any extra thoughts. Yes, just a comment that, well, first of all, I would see the opportunity both for Argentina and for Chile is the development of the lithium mining, because of the emphasis now on electric generation in batteries, and so I can see rather than metal mining such as copper or gold, I would see an ongoing opportunity in the lithium mining, and there are lots of those sorts of deposits both in Chile and in Argentina. And I don't think that mining doesn't require very much, if any, water. The idea of using water from the Pacific Ocean would be a pretty expensive sort of option because of the cost of pumping, because most of that mining certainly in eastern Chile and west along the border with Argentina and in Argentina, we're talking at 2,500, 3,500 meters. So the cost of pumping water up to that level is pretty expensive. But as I say, I would see the future very much in lithium mining, but on both sides of the border. Whether those could be developed jointly and across the border, I really don't know. But I think there are enough deposits on either side, separately on either side of the border. So that is where I would be optimistic as far as across the border or joint development would be in lithium as much as, if not more so than metal mining.
Thank you, Chris.
So,
and we are nearing the end of our chat, but I don't want to leave without addressing two more questions presented by the audience. The first is by John Price, and is directed mostly towards Daniela, in that it entails legal risk. John asks, how much litigious risks are these high altitude in or near glaciers projects exposed to? Is, Daniela, in your view, litigation risk higher in Argentina or in Chile?
I think that, just as said before, Ricardo, in both sides of the border, you have deep risks if you don't make the correct early engagement with the projects and to let the community to know in the best way the project that you will be done. If you think about the story of Pascua Lama, the Pascua side, it's really, really simple if you talk about environmental impacts, because the process will be done in Argentina. So the community were not able to understand how you will develop the project. And this means that you don't build in the correct way your social license. I think that everything it's about that. And if you talk about litigation risk, I think that in the case of Chile, it's something really critical right now, because our environmental evaluation system, it's not enough strong to be able to control all the risks that came after you get your approval. So in most, I don't have the exact number now here. I was looking over internet if I find out, but I don't have exactly, but it's around the 70 or the 75% of each project that's end the evaluation process that go to the judicialization. It's a really normal concept here in Chile. So I think that you have this problem because, for one side, in the Chilean case, you don't have still an update of the environmental legislation, and for the other side, you have empowered communities, and these communities want to know the project from the start. don't want that you arrive with everything done. You need to start in the exploration time, in the engagement procedure. And just one point about the Christopher point, the lithium, it's an spectacular possibility. And in the Chilean case, you have the problem that you need a special contract of operation with the state. And this is something that it's being right now really difficult to obtain. So I still have a lot of trust that the binational projects will be able to develop in both sides of the country with another metals until we, with the new constitution or with the new laws, resolve the lithium problem, because the investors don't have guarantees enough if they start the exploration of lithium, because you don't know if you will get or not. And just couple of weeks ago, the High Court in Chile resolved to not continue with the 2 of these contracts. So this is something that it's a legal risk too, and it's not easy to resolve right now.
Thank you, Daniela. For those of you who are joining us live, we are now at noon Eastern time, and we have exhausted our allocated time slot for the presentation. We have one more question from the audience that I would like to address. So for those of you who need to disconnect, who need to join other commitments, we will be making this recording available to you through our email distribution list. So you can certainly catch up in a couple of days when we distribute it. And nonetheless, we thank you so much for joining. Daniela, before we wrap up, I would like to follow up with one last question and abuse of your and Ricardo and Chris's time. Since we started late, I think we can probably take a couple more minutes to discuss this, because John presented a very interesting question regarding community relations, which is something that Chris and Ricardo have also touched on. Community relations, John says, are very important, but some of these projects are in quite isolated locations, especially high altitude locations. That said, these projects seem to foment a lot of national and binational opposition when the cross-border projects are close to glaciers and river sources. So to you, Daniela, and obviously Chris and Ricardo, if you'd like to chime in, how does a single project take on national and very emotional opposition to the issue of contaminating sacred water resources?
And again, about the Ricardo subject, I think that if you don't build a trust since the start of the exploration in the territory, you will have the problem that you will be not working against impact, real impact. You will be working with perception. You talk about the big project, and this big project will be, of course, very high, but near to glacier, to water resources, and the community. This is the expectation that you have, because you have 2 ways of communicate. You have to communicate with the investors, and you talk about the very big project because you need to do it, and after that, you arrive to a community that it's normally very small, very rural, not with enough tools to understand this big project. So they will think what they want to think about your project if you don't do the work of go there any times that you need and talk to them and explain really clearly everything that you will be done there from the exploration time, because they start to see the tracks, the red tracks with a lot of things, and so they think about the big thing that you are doing that, and they are not able to understand from the start. And this is a big risk to build your social license and your LTO, because right now the social license sits your LTO in countries as Chile. So of course, in the case of Pascua Lama, it's really high. You have around 70 kilometers from the first little town, from the first little group of people in the Chilean side. But otherwise, if you don't really explain them, this small village, what are you doing there? You will have, of course, a lot of perception, and you will be all the time talking about this perception. And this is something that Pascua Lama had to manage until now. They are just against perception. They are never talking about real impacts. And what you are going to evaluate in the environmental system, it's the real impacts of the project, but never talk about the perceptions that the community have. And so I think that this is something that, of course, start to change. I am working with the lithium projects, and we are starting to make this engagement since the start, since you start to go to the field, since you start to go to make your first walks in the exploration areas. And I think that this is the way now, because of course, as the question said, you have just fears, opinions, and perceptions. And of course, this can kill a project right now.
Thank you, Daniela. Ricardo, Chris, do you have any final remarks?
Would either Ricardo or Christopher like to comment on this issue, or?
Yes. Thank you for us to give the opportunity to talk about this, because basically it is the most important issue these days. And as far as most mining companies have a lot of talented people doing technical issues, there is no enough talent built up on this special thing that we call ESG these days, or social license or license to operate, or whatever you call it. Basically, it's being a good neighbor from the start, from the very first day. And we have learned by default that this is the issue that we have to care the most, even from the, as Daniela said, the early very days. There's several examples, there's several different occasions and situations in both sides of the countries, and I had followed it for several years, in which the people in the nearby communities, even 100 kilometers from the mining site, only learned when the final consultation of the EIA is done. And that's the major cause of revolutionary concepts that become the issues of sacred waters, or the sacred glaciers or sites or archaeological sites appear right at that moment. And that's the worst scenario that any mining company would face. We are seeing the very negative effects of not interacting with the communities. In Peru, for example, the Las Bambas roads should have never been a road, should have been a mineral duct going through the communities with a lot of different scenarios, but the different scenarios were never built. And they were never studied in regional and local communities. And that's the cause for the defaults of Pascua Lama and whatever, several different projects. And that will continue if we don't believe, the mining community don't believe that the non-technical or sometimes the abstract subjects such as social license are to be played first. And that's a change of command, that's a change of a scenario in the mental framework that we have to all play together. And I hope that mining communities build up on that very, very important subject in the near future.
Thank you, Ricardo. Chris?
Yeah, if I can, I would just endorse what Richard and Daniela have said. The question of water, not just the availability or the use of water, which reduces the availability for local communities, but also the impact on the quality of that water, are absolute key issues for any environmental study. and it's very often is the basis of the objection raised by local communities is just, you're going to use our water or you're going to spoil our water.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Christopher. I just want to finish with a few comments. I want to thank Daniela, Ricardo, Christopher, Alejandro for this discussion. You know, going back to Christopher's opening remarks, which, you know, at first seemed somewhat polemic, but on sort of further reflection, I think if you look around Latin America at all the different mining projects and the set of risks that one exposes oneself to, as Ricardo says, if you take care of the local community, if you begin there and get them on side, you can tackle a lot of the political and even legal and regulatory risks that emerge from the capital city, because political power in Latin America is still decentralized, even if legal and regulatory power is centralized. So if you have that political support locally, it does a lot. But when you look at binational projects, you have to sort of scratch your head and think, why would I take on a project with twice as much legal risk, twice as much regulatory risk, twice as much compliance risk? You know, why not just build it on one side of the border, or even still have two separate projects? Okay, there's a loss of some economy of scale, but all of those risks, doubling down on those, this is not for the faint of heart. This is for large mining companies with deep resources that can take the time to build their case on both sides of the border. And obviously there has to be very strong geological reasoning to take on a project of this risk. But I think that as much as you can foment local community support, the reality is that in these borderland areas, these are not big communities that unto themselves have a lot of political power. What they have the power to do is to instill a sense of shame and guilt on the national political psyche of what are you going to do to my community. But I think that the notion of contaminating water at its most precious source is something that resonates universally across the world. But if you know Latin America and you've spent time in Latin America, you know that most people live in lowland, large cities, and everywhere around them, water sources are contaminated. So the notion that the one pocket of their country that is still untouched, i.e. the highlands, where water is pure and there's a sense of hope and purity in that area, the thought that somebody's going to come along and potentially destroy that is all the more powerful because they don't have clean natural water sources close to them. And that's different than the mindset, say, of a Canadian or the mindset of an American or the mindset of even an Australian. And I think that it's a really tough issue to get your hands around. And I think it's very naive of mining companies to think, well, okay, yeah, you know, Barrick screwed up, but we're going to do it differently. From the mindset of a voter in Santiago or a mindset of a voter in Buenos Aires, there is no difference between a Barrick or a Glencore or an Xstrata. It's a large mining company that is going to scar the most, you know, coveted parts of the geography of my country. And is it worth, you know, is it worth the risk? Is it worth the long-term damage that has? So I think that these projects in many ways face bigger challenges than almost any projects in Latin America. These high altitude, close to glacier, close to water source projects that don't just pose an existential threat to local communities, but pose a emotional threat to the entire country. And it's a difficult thing to quantify. Miners by their upbringing and by their education are scientists at heart. And again, there's a big difference between the mindset of a voter in a big city in Latin America, which determines politically the fate of these projects, versus a voter in Toronto or in London or in the United States. And so I think you have to really consider these projects, and I would put these at some of the highest risk projects anywhere in Latin America today. You know, all the best to those who take them on, but I think you really have to be sensitive to all of these risks and work with other miners to really educate that urban voter who's never going to ever visit your project site, but is going to have very strong opinions of it. So with that, needless to say, we've just only begun the discussion of this issue. The fact is that there are phenomenal geological deposits in these areas, and they're going to attract the interest of miners for years. But until that urban voter understands that these areas can be mined carefully and sensibly, it's going to be a tough road to develop them. So thank you all. Alejandro and I will be in PDAC for those of you who will be joining, and please reach out to us and let's sit down in Toronto and chat. And otherwise, we will see you all a month from now at our next coffee chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.